Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with me.
And me.
Today we're going to be tackling a really crucial period in American history.
Yeah.
The end of legal segregation in the South between 1955 and 1965.
Huge changes.
It's really a time when, everything's shifting.
Yeah, a time of just monumental change.
And we're going to try to understand, how and why that all happened.
You know, it's easy to think of this era as, ancient history.
Right.
But it's really not that long ago, and the echoes of, those struggles are still felt today.
Yeah, and it's surprising how it all unfolded.
Yeah.
So our guide for this journey is going to be a podcast episode.
Okay.
It's called 31, The End of Segregation in the South, 1955-1965, from Mr. Hutchings History.
Great podcast.
Yeah, and I think it's packed with those aha moments that,
Right.
make history come alive.
Yeah, this episode really struck me because I think it goes beyond just the familiar names and dates, that we typically associate with the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
It really gets into, the everyday people alongside landmark legislation, and how those two things combined really were the driving force behind this monumental change.
Yeah, so let's dive right in.
Okay.
And I guess the place to start is with those landmark laws that we always hear about.
Absolutely.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964
Cool.
and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Huge.
They're always kind of mentioned together, but what
Yeah.
made each one so groundbreaking?
So I think a good way to think about it is the Civil Rights Act really strikes at the heart of segregation itself.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if you look at Title II, for example, it outlawed segregation in places like, restaurants, hotels, theaters, places that, many white Americans took for granted.
Right.
Black Americans were often denied entry.
It's hard to believe that was the reality just a few decades ago.
Yeah. It's
And then Title VI went even further, right?
Yeah, Title VI is interesting because it's like the government saying, okay, you want to discriminate, fine, but you're not getting any federal funding. So that really hit institutions where it hurt, in their wallets.
Yeah.
It was a huge incentive for change.
So it's not just declaring things illegal.
Right.
It's putting the muscle behind it.
Exactly.
And then you have the Voting Rights Act.
Yes.
And that one's really interesting.
Very interesting.
Because it wasn't just about getting rid of, poll taxes and literacy tests, was it?
No, not at all.
It went much deeper.
Much deeper. And it's like the act anticipated these sneaky tactics that some states might try to use to keep black people from voting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Section 5, for example, was brilliant.
Okay.
It said any state with a history of discriminatory voting practices had to get any changes to their voting laws pre-approved by the federal government.
So they couldn't just, change the rules.
Exactly. It was a huge power shift.
Wow, that's pretty radical for the time.
Yeah.
So they're saying, we're watching you.
Right.
We're not going to let you get away with this anymore.
Ex-
So these two acts really mark the end of, what they call de jure segregation, which means segregation by law.
Right.
It's like closing one massive chapter of inequality.
Absolutely. But of course, the fight for equality didn't end there.
Right.
And I think I understand how these victories came about. We have to
Yeah.
go back and look at, the groups and individuals that really laid the groundwork,
Okay.
starting with the NAACP
Okay.
and their legal strategy.
Yeah, they were relentless, weren't they?
Oh, they were relentless.
It wasn't just about winning a case here or there. It was about, chipping away at the foundation of segregation, brick by brick.
They were playing the long game,
Yeah.
and it culminated in that huge victory, Brown v. Board of Education in 1954.
Yeah.
That case, it declared that separate but equal. The doctrine that had justified segregation since Plessy v. Ferguson back in 1896 was inherently unequal.
Huge.
It was a turning point in legal history.
And it's crazy how much, rested on that one decision.
Right.
But Brown didn't just come out of nowhere.
Right.
There were other cases that helped pave the way, right?
Yeah, there were so many crucial victories along the way,
Uh-huh.
like Gillion v. Lightfoot,
Okay.
which dealt with the outrageous practice of gerrymandering districts to exclude black voters,
No.
or Boynton v. Virginia, which, believe it or not, took on segregation in interstate bus terminals.
Oh, wow.
So these were all about, expanding the battleground for equality, pushing the boundaries further and further.
It's inspiring to see how they kept at it,
Yeah.
using the system itself to dismantle the very laws that were designed to oppress.
Yeah.
But of course, legal battles were only one part of the story.
Absolutely.
We can't talk about this era without talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Of course.
and his philosophy of nonviolent resistance.
Yeah, King's impact is undeniable.
Uh-huh.
He took inspiration from Gandhi's teachings and applied them in a way that really resonated with the American experience.
Yeah, and he really understood the power of, like, peaceful protest to expose the brutality of segregation.
Right, and not just to America, but to the world.
And one event that I think really brought this brutality into focus was the Birmingham Campaign of 1963.
Birmingham.
That was a turning point.
Yeah, Birmingham was a calculated risk.
Right.
King and his allies knew that Birmingham was a hotbed of racial tension, and they deliberately provoked a confrontation to expose, the violence that was inherent in the system.
Right.
And those images that came out of Birmingham are just seared into our national conscience.
Oh, yeah.
Police dogs attacking peaceful protesters, children being blasted by fire hoses.
It's hard to believe those images are real.
I know.
It's like something out of a nightmare.
Yeah.
And yet there it was on television screens across the country.
Yeah.
It forced America to confront the ugliness of what was happening.
Absolutely.
And I think those images had a profound effect on President John F. Kennedy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Who had been hesitant to push for, sweeping civil rights legislation.
Well,
but Birmingham changed everything.
It did.
He had to act.
Yeah.
And in June of 1963, he finally proposed a bill.
Huge moment.
It was a bold move, but sadly, his assassination later that year meant that it fell to Lyndon B. Johnson to actually see it through.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating is that Johnson,
Right.
a Southern Democrat, was unwavering in his commitment to this cause.
That's one of the things that surprised me most in this podcast episode.
Yeah.
Johnson was this, shrewd politician, a master of the Senate.
Yeah.
But he was also deeply principled.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that passing this bill would be a fight, especially with those Southern senators ready to filibuster it to death.
Oh, yeah.
But he was determined to get it done.
It makes you wonder what was going through his mind.
Right.
He must have known the risks, the backlash from his own party.
Oh, he did. In fact, there's that famous quote where he says that the Civil Rights Act, might cost the Democratic Party of the South for a generation.
Wow.
That's not just a political prediction. That's an acknowledgement of the deep-seated resistance he was up against.
That's chilling.
It is.
It shows how much he was willing to put on the line.
Yeah, he knew this was bigger than politics.
Yeah.
It was about the soul of America.
So we've got this monumental legislation.
Yes.
A president willing to fight for it.
Right.
But the struggle's far from over. The focus then shifts to voting rights.
Right.
And that's where the Selma to Montgomery Marches in 1965 come in.
The Selma marches were a direct challenge to the systemic disenfranchisement of black voters in the South.
Yeah.
King and the SCLC knew that the world was watching.
Yeah.
And they strategically chose Selma, Alabama, a place that was notorious for its, brutal suppression of black voting rights.
And they were met with unimaginable violence.
They were.
Bloody Sunday, the day those peaceful marchers were attacked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Horrible.
It became this symbol of the vicious resistance to voting rights.
It was a horrifying spectacle. And it galvanized the nation in a way nothing else had.
Yeah.
It forced people to confront the reality that even with the Civil Rights Act in place, the fight for equality was far from over.
And it's in the wake of Bloody Sunday that we see another pivotal moment. President Johnson's address to Congress, where he delivers his iconic "We shall overcome" speech.
Powerful speech.
It must have been electric.
It was.
This Southern Democrat standing before Congress, embracing the anthem of the civil rights movement.
A moment of profound moral clarity.
Yeah.
And it signaled that Johnson wasn't just going to enforce the Civil Rights Act. He was going to push for even bolder legislation to guarantee voting rights for all Americans.
And that's exactly what he did.
He did.
The Voting Rights Act, fueled by the momentum of Selma and Johnson's leadership, was passed with strong bipartisan support.
It's incredible to think about how much happened in such a short span of time.
Yeah, it really is.
It's like a decade's worth of progress crammed into a few short years.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate, the power of collective action.
Absolutely.
The courage of those who risked everything to demand justice.
Yeah.
And the leadership of those who stood up and said, enough is enough.
It's inspiring.
But there's another piece of this puzzle that we need to explore.
Okay.
And that's the role of the media.
Okay.
Specifically television.
Ah, interesting.
Because before television, many Americans, especially in the North, were really insulated from the realities of segregation.
That's right.
They might have read about it in the newspapers, but they didn't see it.
They didn't see it with their own eyes.
So television broke down that wall.
It did.
And brought those images of violence and injustice.
Right into people's living rooms.
Right into their home.
Exactly. Imagine you're sitting at home in 1963.
Yeah.
Black and white TV flickering.
Oh, right.
And suddenly you see those images from Birmingham police dogs attacking fire hoses, blasting. Those images beamed into homes across the nation.
Right.
They had a visceral impact that words could never capture.
It's like television made it impossible to turn away from the truth.
Yeah, you couldn't ignore it anymore.
It forced people to confront what was happening.
Absolutely.
And that's actually where we'll pick up in part 2.
Okay, great.
Of our deep dives.
That's good.
We'll be exploring how the media's coverage of these events really sparked a national outcry.
Right.
And ultimately helped to turn the tide in favor of civil rights.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to overstate the power of those images.
Yeah.
It's like television pierced the veil of denial that had shielded so many Americans from the realities of the South.
Yeah, it makes you think about how much what we see shapes how we understand the world. Absolutely. And back then, television was that window for so many people.
It was. And what they saw through that window, the violence, the hatred, the brutality of segregation, it sparked a moral outrage that couldn't be ignored.
So it wasn't just about reporting the facts.
Right.
It was about capturing those raw human moments that transcended the politics and spoke to people's hearts.
Exactly. And the coverage of events like Birmingham, the March on Washington Bloody Sunday, they played a crucial role in mobilizing public opinion.
Yeah.
Particularly among white Americans who might not have grasped the depth of the problem before.
It's like those images created this shared experience, a sense of empathy that bridged the racial divide.
Exactly. And that shift in public opinion was critical for building the support needed to pass the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a Southern issue anymore.
Right.
It was a national crisis that demanded a national response.
It's like the media acted as this catalyst, transforming a regional struggle into a national movement for justice.
And it's fascinating how the media wasn't just reflecting these events. It was shaping them.
Right.
Think about those iconic images we've been talking about. They became powerful symbols, rallying points for the movement. They helped to define the narrative and galvanize support in a way that just wouldn't have been possible without television.
It really is a testament to the power of visual storytelling.
It is.
Sometimes an image can be more powerful than 1,000 words.
Absolutely. And those images beamed into homes across the nation.
Yeah.
They helped to awaken the conscience of America and create the political will necessary for change.
It's like the media held up a mirror to society.
Yes.
Forcing it to confront its own reflection.
Now, beyond the media's influence, our source material also delves into the different ways that historians have interpreted the civil rights movement.
Okay.
It can get a bit academic. But I think it's important to explore because it shows just how complex and multifaceted this era really was.
Yeah, history is rarely a simple story.
No.
It's more like this tapestry woven from different perspectives and interpretations.
Right. Yeah.
So let's unravel some of those threads. The podcast mentions a few key schools of thought.
Okay.
The Traditionalist school, the Continuity school, the Legalist school, and then social historians.
Okay.
Can you give us a quick breakdown of each one?
Sure. So the Traditionalist historians, they tend to focus on those larger-than-life figures.
Yeah.
Like Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC.
Okay.
They see the movement as driven by these charismatic leaders and their ability to mobilize mass protests and demonstrations.
So it's a top-down perspective.
Yes, focusing on those key individuals.
Okay.
Then you have the Continuity school, which takes a longer view.
Right.
They argue that the civil rights movement wasn't just this sudden eruption.
Okay.
It was the culmination of decades of activism and organizing.
Oh, interesting.
So they point to earlier civil rights leaders, organizations like the NAACP, even labor movements, as laying the groundwork for the victories of the 1960s.
So it's about the slow buildup of pressure.
Exactly, the long game that leads to a tipping point.
Okay. And then you have the Legalist school.
Right. The Legalists, they really emphasize the crucial role of the judiciary and federal legislation in dismantling segregation.
So their focus is on those landmark court decisions.
Yes.
Like Brown v. Board.
Brown v. Board, exactly.
Okay.
Which created the legal framework for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act.
So they see the law as the primary driver of change.
Right. The tool that ultimately breaks down those barriers.
Okay. And finally, we have the social historians.
Right. The social historians are all about the grassroots.
Okay.
The everyday people who organized, protested, and put their lives on the line to demand justice.
Yeah.
They argue that while figures like King played important roles, the true engine of change was the collective action of ordinary citizens.
So it's a bottom-up perspective.
Exactly.
Highlighting the power of community organizing and activism.
Right. And what's fascinating is that none of these perspectives are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You know, it was a complex interplay of factors.
Yeah.
Leadership legislation, grassroots activism media coverage that ultimately brought about this monumental shift.
It's a reminder that history is rarely neat and tidy.
Rarely.
It's messy, it's complicated.
Yes.
And it's often the result of all these things colliding in unexpected ways.
Absolutely.
And in this case, it was the convergence of those forces that led to the end of legal segregation in the South.
But the story doesn't end there.
Right.
The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were monumental victories. But it didn't erase racism or eliminate inequality overnight.
No, of course not.
They were a beginning.
Right.
And those victories paved the way for further advancements.
Like what?
Like the Fair Housing Act of 1968.
Okay.
Which addressed discrimination in housing.
Okay.
And they inspired other social justice movements to fight for equality, not just in America, but around the world.
It's like a ripple effect spreading outward.
It is.
Transforming the fabric of society.
And that's why I think it's so important to understand this era, not just as a chapter in a history book, but as a living legacy that continues to shape our world today.
It's a reminder that the fight for justice is never truly over.
It's ongoing.
There's always more work to be done.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
What are some of the ways that you see the legacy of the civil rights movement playing out in our world today? How do the events of that era shape our understanding of current challenges?
That's a great question.
It's something to think about.
It is, because understanding the past is essential for navigating the present and shaping the future.
And that's what makes history so relevant.
Absolutely.
It's not just about dates and events.
Right.
It's about understanding the forces that shape our world.
Yeah.
And the choices that we make as individuals and as a society.
Yeah. It's amazing how, even though these events happened decades ago, they still feel so relevant today.
They do.
You know, it's like the echoes of the civil rights movement.
Just reverberate.
Right.
Through every fight for social justice that we see happening around us.
It's true. The struggles, the strategies, the victories, even the setbacks of that era offer like invaluable lessons for anyone you know seeking to create a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
We've explored landmark legislation, the power of the courts, the impact of nonviolent resistance, the role of the media, even different historical perspectives.
It's been a lot.
But as we wrap up, like, what are some of the key takeaways for you? What really stands out?
Well, for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that change is rarely easy or quick.
Right.
The civil rights movement was a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
It required, decades of persistent effort, countless acts of courage, a willingness to face down, fierce opposition.
It's like that saying, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But it doesn't bend on its own.
No, it takes people pushing and pulling, demanding that it bend.
And I think another crucial lesson is the power of collective action.
Oh, yeah.
The civil rights movement was a testament to what can be accomplished when people come together, united by a common purpose.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just about, a few charismatic leaders. It was about ordinary people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
Raising their voices, marching in the streets, and demanding change.
It was a movement of the people.
It's a reminder that even in the face of these, seemingly insurmountable obstacles, we have the power to make a difference when we work together.
Absolutely. And I think it also highlights the importance of, finding those pressure points, those levers that can shift the balance of power.
Yeah.
The NAACP focused on legal challenges. King and his allies mastered the art of nonviolent protest.
Right.
And the media amplified their message to a national and global audience. Each of them played a crucial role in dismantling the system of segregation.
So it's not just about fighting.
Right.
It's about fighting strategically.
Exactly.
Understanding the system you're trying to change.
Yeah.
And finding the most effective ways to challenge it.
And I think we can also learn from the mistakes and setbacks of the movement.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The struggle for civil rights wasn't a smooth upward trajectory.
Right.
There were disagreements, miscalculations, moments of despair.
It's human nature, right?
Yeah.
Even the most righteous movements are made up of people. And people are imperfect.
They are.
And, they're trying to figure things out.
Right. And I think acknowledging those complexities, those internal struggles, makes the story even more compelling.
Yeah.
It reminds us that progress isn't always linear. Setbacks are inevitable.
Right.
But what matters is that the movement learned from those setbacks, adapted, and continued to push forward.
It's like that quote, "Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall."
Right. And it's also a reminder that the work of building a more just and equitable society is never truly finished. The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were monumental achievements.
Yeah.
But they didn't solve every problem.
Right.
Discrimination, prejudice, systemic inequality, they still exist.
They do.
In many forms.
So it's not about declaring victory and moving on.
No.
It's about recognizing that, the fight for justice is ongoing.
It's a relay race.
Yeah.
Where each generation passes the torch to the next.
And each generation faces its own unique challenges.
Yeah, they do.
But the lessons of the civil rights movement, the strategies, the principles, the belief in the possibility of change.
Right.
These are timeless.
They are.
And universal.
Absolutely. It's about carrying that spirit forward.
Yeah.
Applying those lessons to the struggles we face today. And continuing to push for a better world.
Well said. And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought.
Okay.
The civil rights movement shows us that even the most deeply entrenched systems of oppression can be challenged and overcome.
It can be.
It's a story of courage, resilience, and the power of hope.
Absolutely.
And it's a story that continues to unfold right here, right now.
Yes.
As people around the world fight for justice and equality.
So what are you waiting for?
Yeah, get out there.
Find your voice.
Find your voice. Join the movement.
Make a difference.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep fighting for a better world.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.